It's brought to you by the Alpha Wealth Group, bringing the trilogy of estate, tax, and investment planning together. Visit alphawealthgroup.com for a free report.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. A lot has happened since Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was sent to Ukraine to make a deal on a shared mineral, rare earth minerals arrangement between Ukraine and the United States. Trump was skeptical about it over the weekend, and then much more optimistic about it after his powwow with Emmanuel Macron, who also basically endorsed the deal.
Yeah,
so
sure did.
Where was Zelensky to go other than to iron out any details and accept it, which seems to be now in the offing, perhaps before the week is out?
Yeah, and Zelensky is reportedly going to the White House on Friday.
VDH, writing over at American Greatness, here's what Trump should do now. Talk softer while carrying a bigger stick. Leverage, if possible, a return of Putin to his February 23, 2022 borders. Accept that none of the last three presidents believed Ukraine could militarily regain Donbass and Crimea, and neither will be recaptured. Keep Ukraine out of NATO. Help NATO to ensure Ukraine is well armed and capable of thwarting any Russian violation of the peace. In other words, a hyper-NATO ability without being in NATO formally. Insist that all NATO countries meet their 2% contributions over the next 3 years, up to 5%. And allow U.S. interests to do business in Ukraine for a variety of economic and strategic advantages. For reaction to that and where things stand, we're pleased to be joined by Jed Babbin, former United States Deputy Undersecretary of Defense, contributor to the Washington Times and the American Spectator. Jed, thanks for joining us.
Well, good morning, guys.
What do you think about VDH's to-do list for Trump at this point?
Well, it's kind of idealistic. I think it's a little too much. I don't think that there's any way Putin's going to be withdrawing from the land he's taken since February of 2022.
Yeah,
that's just a given. And I think that a lot of other things going on. I mean, in terms of peacekeepers being stationed there, I'm all for having, the French and the Spanish, the Italians, whoever, go in there. But I don't believe we should be risking American lives in defense of Ukraine. And that's what it really comes down to. I do not believe that Putin is going to stop where he's stopped now. I think he's pretty much, his economy is doing relatively well, and I think he's not going to be suffering as we should make him suffer in terms of economic sanctions. Europe is still buying gas, natural gas from Russia. Why the blank is that going on? Mm-hmm. So they're helping prop up his economy, and I don't think they're going to be doing much in terms of contributing more to their own defense. So I have a very pessimistic view of what's going to happen. I think if we're going to have a rare earth minerals deal from Ukraine to us, I think that's a good idea. But to give them some sort of security guarantees, again, we do not have a vital national security interest in securing Ukraine. There are a lot of other places where we do, but not in Ukraine, and I do not believe we should risk American lives for Ukraine.
Well, what about the fine minerals that we're going to be getting in exchange for us donating billions of dollars to their war efforts?
Well, it's a good idea to be getting them. Well, it is bizarre, but on the other hand, we don't have a whole lot of other sources, Russia, China, and they're hardly reliable. And I think if we can get a good bit from Ukraine, I think that's a good thing in trade for our donations to them. And, it simply was donations. It's not going to be a question of them being able to repay them. So, whatever Europe is doing is another thing. They are loaning money to Ukraine. I think we need to get something for our value. And I think the rare earth minerals is a very good way to go.
Tom Tillis, Republican senator from North Carolina, said this in part, I'm quoting him, on Putin. Whoever believes that there's any space for Vlad Putin in the future of a stable globe better go to Ukraine. They better go to Europe. They better invest the time to understand that this man is a cancer and the greatest threat to democracy in my lifetime. And it will be a cancer that spreads into the South China Sea, into Taiwan, and metastasizes across the globe. So, ladies and gentlemen, when I tell you that Vlad Putin is a liar, a murderer, a man responsible for ordering the systemic torture, kidnapping, rape of innocent civilians, believe me, because the evidence is mile high. So for those of us who have invested time to understand this, believe me when I tell you this is important to every single one of you. If you believe that Ukraine is a country an ocean away and not relevant to our national security, think again. The world is small. The world is watching. The strength of our alliances are on the line, and the future of democracy and the world is on the line if we do anything less than defeat Putin. Your reaction?
Well, I think that overstates it a little bit. I think, frankly, we should be opposing Putin. He is not the biggest threat we have in the world. That is a rank shared by China and Iran. And I think we have to face up to the fact that Europe is not going to pull its weight, and we're going to have to do the lion's share of whatever is done. But again, we have a national security interest in Ukraine. We have an interest in thwarting Putin. We do not have a vital national security interest. And somebody who taught me that about 2 decades ago really would be, I think, pretty aghast at the fact that we are going to be apparently defending Ukraine. Again, we have an interest. We do not have a vital national security interest, and that is the big difference.
Yeah, and the Tom Tillis soaring rhetoric, or at least that's what he thinks soaring rhetoric is, and the whole defeat Putin type thing. I mean, it's easy to say, and on a some sort of rational timeline, I'm all for it to the extent we can do it. But they say those things sort of in an open-ended way, like, okay, so what are the action steps that we're supposed to take right now to defeat Putin? Everybody wants to defeat Putin, but how do I get from A to defeating Putin? And that's where Tom Tillis and these other people sort of fall down on the job.
Well, I think that's also true of Mr. Trump. I mean, our allies around the world have to be shaking their heads and trying to figure out what the blank is going on. We voted against a Ukrainian resolution condemning Russia for its aggression in the UN. Really? We are now pressuring Zelensky and threatening to him, he's trying to get a leverage on us for Ukraine, for NATO membership in Ukraine. That's simply not going to happen, or shouldn't happen. There are a lot of things that we could be doing, but our allies around the world have to be reassured. They have to be confident in American support. And right now, I don't think they can be, because they're all just sitting around saying, what in the heck is Trump doing?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, come on. I mean, how many times do we have to see this act from Trump before you start to pick up what he's laying down? And, I mean, of course, the left is going to run. He's a Putin sympathizer. He's a Putin agent, all this stuff. And he's withdrawing from the world, Fortress America. And what, in fact, happens is exactly what we saw this week, is that Macron gets sent here as a representative of Western Europe to basically grovel and provide support for and talk about how some of the points Trump has made are good points, and we're moving in that direction. And look, Keir Starmer is asking for a bigger percentage of the budget to go to military, and I'm doing it in Europe, and we have fallen down, and it is our fault that Crimea was taken and there was no response. I mean, that's not withdrawing from the world. That's getting them to own their participation and, frankly, bend the knee for America's continued leadership.
I agree to an extent. I do not believe Russia is, Putin. Obviously, Trump is not a Putin agent, anything like that. The left is crazy when they say that. But the fact of the matter is, we are on shaky ground. We are now sucking up to Putin. Why did we say, why in the world did Trump say that, Russia was not the aggressor?
Right.
Why do we have J.D. Vance saying that, maybe we should put military intervention into Ukraine? I mean, really? I mean, come on, guys. This is something we need to have a steady hand on the tiller for.
But Trump has alternatively said, hey, look, Russia didn't invade Ukraine when I was president. He invaded when Obama was and Biden was. So he has already he's on record conceding the point many times that Russia did, in fact, invade. And now he's just sort of positioning this because I think he's almost trolling Putin a little bit to try to get him to the table to get whatever deal can get done.
Well, I hope so. The only problem is we're not really sure. And a good deal would preserve Ukraine's sovereignty. I don't believe we're on track to do that. We're not on track to preserve their sovereignty because we're not on track to assure them that, Russia is not going to invade again. And I don't think that's even possible.
Right.
If you look at Putin's philosopher Alexander Dugin has written a book called Foundations of Geopolitics. And in that, he said something I think that Putin agrees with. He wrote, Alexander Dugin did, that unless you conquer Ukraine, you might as well not bother to try to restore the rest of the Soviet Empire because it's the keystone. And I think Putin believes that. I believe he does, and I don't think he's going to deter himself or be deterred for very long, maybe a year or maybe two, in terms of the peace that might be imposed over Ukraine. But after that, he's going to go right back at it. And I don't believe that we can solve the problem of Ukraine without solving the entire problem of Europe. And I don't think that's going to happen in my lifetime.
No, I mean that's a complicated problem, as you're right to point out. And with respect to Putin, though, I mean you have to say, just in terms of sort of the immediacy of trying to bring some cessation of hostilities, and then figuring out where we go from there, longer term with respect to Putin and Russia in particular. But I mean. It's a country of, 50 million people? I mean, it's not like it's China or India. And they've taken reportedly 950,000 to 1 million men lost on the battlefront. I mean, he has suffered some significant losses and frankly, a diminishment, I think, in the world's view of just exactly how mighty the Russian military is, don't you think?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the Russian military has completely failed. They, number one, did not establish air supremacy over Ukraine in the first couple of days of the war, which they could have and should have done, but they didn't. They weren't able to, apparently, and they didn't take Kiev. They didn't take any of the major cities they have been bombarding most of the cities in Ukraine, but they have not taken them. So, the Russian military has failed. They've got 10,000 North Korean reinforcements now, which apparently they're just using as cannon fodder. But there's a lot of other things going on there, and the war is not going to end just because we want it to. I think we have to force an end to it if we can, and at this point, unless we put a lot more pressure on Putin, and unless Europe is willing to put a lot more pressure on Putin, I don't think it's ever going to happen.
Yeah, that economic piece is important. And actually, Trump made that point in his first term, too, is on why you're buying gas, Germany, why you're buying gas from Russia, right? I mean, propping up their economy. The same thing that we were doing with Biden administration's energy policies is propping up Putin. It's remarkable.
Yep.
I wanted to get your reaction to where things stand in the Middle East. I mean, I don't know if you've seen it yet, but... Oh, boy. There is an AI video that Trump posted on social media of... it's like an advertisement for what Gaza is going to be when Trump rebuilds it, and and it ends with Trump and Bibi sitting next to a pool, virtual versions of them sitting next to a pool having a cocktail. So I mean, he's got big ideas for what Gaza can be. But what's interesting there, with respect to the Gazans themselves, is you're hearing more and more from reporting on the ground of Gazans who don't want to return to Gaza because they understand it's a rock pile and it's going to be disease-ridden and largely uninhabitable, and they're open-minded to being resettled somewhere else, despite what the politicians are saying. Now, that doesn't mean that Jordan and Egypt are on board or anything like that, but I mean, just that the big idea that started this conversation and now is getting reaction from people actually on the ground. Your assessment of greenlighting Bibi to continue to do whatever there's left to do to eradicate Hamas, and then also this situation with trying to solve the refugee crisis.
Well, I think there's two very big different problems there. I think that there's no question we should be greenlighting Mr. Netanyahu for whatever reason he wants to. The murder of the two Bibas children and the mother. How does any rationality attach to that? How do minds become so perverted and so hateful that they allow the strangulation of little children? It just does not make any sense. So if every Hamas member is killed, I'm all for it. But I don't think it's possible. I don't think they're going to have a situation because the Hamas people are basically holding Israel hostage.
Yeah.
Basically they're saying that unless you return all our prisoners, yada yada, however many have killed Israelis and so forth, we're not going to let the hostages go. And they're talking about all sorts of things like that. So they've got Israel over the barrel. I don't believe that Netanyahu is going to go ahead and just resume the war, because I think that would cause Hamas to murder more of the hostages. So it's really a tense situation. I don't think it's going to work out anytime soon. And I think, quite frankly, this war is going to go on for the foreseeable future, because Hamas is not going to give up on Gaza. They can't, and it won't.
And so the refugee situation with displaced Gazans will just be sort of in a purgatory for the foreseeable future, you believe?
Oh, I believe that's very true. I don't think any of the nations surrounding Gaza, not Syria, not Egypt, not Jordan, none of them want the Palestinians, because they know they'd bring a lot of trouble in with them. So, what are you going to do? They're not going to be deported from Gaza. There's 2.2 million, I think, and you're not going to get rid of all those people. So what's the alternative? I don't think there really is one at this point. There's various peace proposals out there, various deals. Itzhak Lapid just recently put up a deal where he thinks Egypt should come in and govern the Gaza Strip for a while. Well, that's not going to happen. So I don't know how else to deal with it. But at this point, as much as I admire Mr. Trump, and I like the idea of him going in there and rebuilding Gaza, it just ain't going to happen.
Jed Babbin, former U.S. Deputy Undersecretary of Defense, contributor to the Washington Times and the American Spectator as well. Jed, thank you as always.
Hey, my pleasure.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Hey, Carl Jackson here for Dennis Prager. While Dennis Prager is recuperating, we know you miss your daily dose of Dennis. That's why Pragertopia is giving you a special gift. Right now, Pragertopia members can hear the best